Hey everyone, today's video is all about interviewing, and these are 5 interview tips. So kind of before the interview, during the interview, and then after. So whether this is your first job right out of school or whether you stayed home with your kids and maybe you're going back to work, this can work for any age at any point in your life. So just to give you a little bit of background about me, I worked in corporate for 10 years and then I went out on my own, started my own business for 5 years, and then I did that so I could have some flexibility with my job, so I could be home for my kids, but also it was something that I always wanted to do, was try my own business. So I ended up going back to the corporate world about a year and a half ago. So I just put together some tips and I hope that you'll find this helpful. So tip number 1 is to prepare. So once you've landed the interview, this is all about not getting the interview, but once you have the interview scheduled, what can you do? So the first thing that you want to do is prepare. And so I would hopefully you've already researched the company and you kind of know a little bit about it before you applied. But you also may want to go on Glassdoor. So it's glassdoor.com. You can read reviews from other people that have worked there. You also want to go on maybe LinkedIn, see what you can find out there. On LinkedIn, a lot of companies have profiles and they talk about recent updates, things that are happening in the news. You can also go on the company's website and just research more information. So the first step is to prepare. I would definitely know what's been happening in the company over the past couple months. You know, have they hired a new senior executive team? Are they changing the culture? Have they acquired new businesses? That type of thing. So first step, prepare. You want to do your research on the company. Step 2 is to look the part. And I think that's really important. When you're going to an interview, you want to look your best. So everything from your outfit to your hair, your makeup. If you're a man, definitely you want to choose something nice to wear. You don't have to worry about makeup, but hair. So I wore a black suit for an interview, and I don't think you can go wrong with a black suit. And what I did, since my interview was in the hair industry, I jazzed it up a little bit and I wore some leopard, they were kind of the sling back pointed toe style. So depending on where you're interviewing, you can change it up a little bit. So for example, if you're applying at a bank, banks are usually conservative. I would probably wear a black suit with maybe a white or cream ivory type shell underneath, keep your jewelry to a minimum, and maybe you just want to stick with black pumps. You know, if you're applying for something in a retail environment, jazz it up a little bit. You know, maybe you can get away with brighter colored jewelry, or if you want to add some leopard or some type of print in a belt or a shoe. Basically, you want to dress for your environment. So even though businesses might say that they're business casual, I think as the person who is getting interviewed, you should always dress up a little bit more. If you don't have a black suit, you could always wear a shirt like this with a pencil skirt. I did that on my second interview at the same company. They called me back. The first interview I wore a suit. The second time I wore this shirt with a black pencil skirt that went to the knee. I wouldn't do anything that's too far above the knee just because you don't want to look revealing or anything, but I think definitely a pantsuit would be nice, a dress, in darker colors. And then for your hair, again, depending on the environment, if you're working in the hair industry, maybe you want to get highlights and, have it look a little bit trendy. If you're applying for a makeup artist job, definitely your makeup wants to be the focal point. But for every day, if you're looking at the corporate environment, I would keep your makeup minimum, your jewelry to a minimum, and hair just looking good and polished. You just want to look good and presentable. So if I can find some images of clothing that I think would work well, I will put those in now. The third step is to show confidence. And this can be hard, especially when you're really nervous because you're going into an interview with people that you don't know. But I think if you look good and you've tried on your clothes the night before, you've laid them out, you've taken a shower, your hair looks good, your makeup looks good, If you look good, you're going to feel better about yourself. So make sure to give yourself plenty of time to get ready in the morning. What I usually do is drive the route the night before or the day before just to make sure I know exactly where to go, where I'm going to park, so there's no surprises in the morning. And then when you meet the person for the first time, you want to give a firm handshake. Even if you're a woman, you can still give a firm handshake. To me, there's nothing worse than, like, I call it the dead fish, where they shake your hand and it just flops. So, give a firm handshake, look the person in the eye. Eye contact is huge. Be aware of your body language. If they're talking to you and you're sitting back, in the chair like this, looking like you don't care, if somebody's talking to you, lean forward, show that you're interested in what they say. Eye contact, be aware of your tone. Also, as women, we tend to end sentences with a question, and I know I do it all the time. But basically, if they ask you a question, answer directly. So I've worked in the training industry for 15 years. What we women tend to do is say, I've worked in the training industry for 15 years. And you end it with a question. So try to speak, answer directly. And try not to end with a question, because I think that shows that we lack a little bit of confidence. So confidence is something that it just takes time, but if you believe in yourself and try to think of those positive messages before you go to the interview, that you're going to do a great job, you look great, you feel great, confidence goes a long way. The fourth tip is to ask questions during the interview. Now, normally how an interview works is you'll go and you'll meet with a person, or maybe it's a panel of people, and most likely they'll tell you a little bit about the company, about the job, and then they'll go into asking you questions. And so during that time, they'll ask you a lot of questions about yourself. And sometimes they'll say, if you have any questions while I'm talking, feel free to ask any questions. So if you have a question about something that they said, I would definitely recommend to ask a clarifying question. If you don't have anything about the questions that they've asked you, then I would wait until the end. Usually the interviewer will say, what questions do you have for me? And I would have 2 to 3 questions in your back pocket to ask. Maybe you want to ask what the culture is like at the company. Because remember, not only do they want you to fit in the position, you want to make sure that the company is a fit. So I like asking about the culture. I also like asking about, what skill set does this person need to be successful? So that way they're really narrowing it down. If it's, excellent Excel skills, building spreadsheets and that type of thing, you want to know that. If it's excellent communication, verbal and written, you want to know that. So I like to ask, what skill set is going to be really successful in this job? And another question you can ask is, how will I get trained or up to speed on the job if I'm hired? So I always like to hear that, because I like to know that they have a plan in place of how they're going to get me up to speed and get me trained. So again, the fourth step is to ask questions. I would definitely have a few in your back pocket that you can ask at the end of the interview. You're obviously going to want to ask questions about, what are the next steps in your process, that type of thing, so that you know what's going to happen next. And the last step in the interview process is to follow up. And years ago, they always said a handwritten note. And I still think a handwritten letter, thank you letter, is really important. But what I found myself doing was definitely sending an email that night after the interview, or a couple hours after the interview, just to thank the person for taking the time to interview you. And then I would follow that up with a handwritten letter. You want to be top of mind, because a lot of times you're not the only candidate that they're interviewing. So I would say definitely do an email follow-up, because most likely you've been communicating through email, and then maybe a couple days later you send them a handwritten follow-up. So I hope that helps in terms of, some tips that you can be aware of during an interview. If you're interested in this type of information, what I'm thinking is maybe I could do another video on questions that I had during an interview, or questions that I asked during an interview. So let me know if you're interested in that. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.